You're listening to the Complete Human podcast, hosted by co-founders Janna Breslin and Evan DeMarco. We share authentic conversations about wellness, longevity, personal growth, and biooptimization, along with inspiring stories that encourage community and social responsibility. We hope you enjoy this episode.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Complete Human podcast with your hosts,
Janna Breslin
and Evan DeMarco. You have been talking with our next guest for a while now. You've forwarded me some information from him, and this is, I'm stoked about this one.
Same.
So I think right now, it's a shit show out there. There's no other way to put it. Like, we've got COVID. We're in Northern California. You know, it's funny. You couldn't go outside without a mask to be, safe for other people. Now you can't go outside without a mask just to be safe for yourself because of all the fires, right? So I think overcoming adversity, really reframing what adversity is right now is something that we're at ground zero for. So introduce our next guest and let's jump into this because I think we're gonna go way past our normal time with this guy.
Absolutely. So Craig Marker, thank you for being here, and we're really excited to have you on because I think, especially right now at this time, our mental health is tested, right? I mean, this is a time where everyone's kind of like, what the heck is going on? How do we manage this? How do we get through this? And we're just so stoked to talk to you about this. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience. I'm sure they'll get a kick out of you and what you have to offer today.
Sure. Yeah, I'm super excited to be on this. I love the different topics you're doing, and it just sounds like a great time to talk about this mental fortitude part. So I appreciate you having me on there. My background is I'm a psychologist by training. I'm a professor, my daytime job. I also got into a lot of exercise and physiology, do a lot with kettlebells and those type of things. So I was writing for Breaking Muscle and T Nation and different things, but my background is psychology, and what really got me interested was I was interested in anxiety disorders, and I saw that people who faced their fears got stronger for it. And this sort of mechanism is built into us that when we do things with the right amount of stress, we get stronger because of it. And then I started looking into it more, and it sounds like this is exactly what exercise is. This is, the mechanisms of exercise. And I would almost say it's a grand unifying theory of biology the more I got into it. The mechanisms, with our mitochondria and how we, if we fast, and how it kills off the bad ones and makes us stronger in the long run. If we do things like inhibit a certain type of food, we get better. If we do cold exposure, heat exposure, and we get more into those topics. But I got really interested in just how the right amount of stress makes us stronger in the long run. And I'm gonna keep saying the right amount. So it's not just go, I don't know if these times are the right amount or not, but stressors make us stronger, and we may not.
You would agree that's physical and mental.
Most definitely. Yep. And I think it's a similar mechanism. And I used to liken it to what blacksmiths do with steel. They heat it, they pound it, and it becomes stronger because of it. But if you heat it too much or you pound it too much, then it will break, it gets brittle. And I think that same analogy really fits us. If we get hit too much, we might become brittle and break, but the right amount makes us stronger.
So that brings up a fascinating question in the age of COVID right now, when you talk about kind of facing your fears. And I think a lot of people are afraid to go outside. A lot of people are afraid of, seeing family. They're afraid to get on a plane. They're afraid to embrace a life that was kind of really defining of who we were prior to this whole epidemic. So as we talk about the right amount of stress and kind of facing our fears, something that you've spoken on quite a bit and written on quite a bit, how does that play into decision-making in a world like COVID, where those decisions or facing your fears could ultimately have a negative health impact?
It's definitely a great question. I mean, I'm used to working with people with anxiety disorders where their fear is exaggerated, and having them, do things that are pretty scary to them is pretty normal for many people. So I think safety is always an important issue. We're not going to turn any person with anxiety disorder into a daredevil. But I'm not advocating we go out and run and, try to go to COVID parties or anything like that. That's no, I just want to be very clear on that. I think the right amount of stress is important. And I think, it's figuring out where that balance is. And, if we think of a dichotomy of where we're at, if we're too much in the anxiety bin, then we need to push ourselves a little bit more towards the middle. If we're too much of a daredevil, we need to go more towards the middle too.
So that brings up a really interesting question. I've never been a person to have anxiety in my entire life. And kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember I started having this weird thing. I woke up and I couldn't breathe, and I'm I couldn't catch my breath. And the first thing, and I'm like, oh my God.
Tightness in the chest.
Yeah. And I'm like, I've got COVID. So I call a doctor friend of mine, and she's like, I'll be right over. And she comes over, masked up, and she's listening to my lungs. And she's like, she's looking at my pulse ox, and she's like, you're having an anxiety attack. And I'm like, no, that can't be right. Pete, that's not real. That's like sex addiction. Is that actually a thing?
Well, you've never really experienced things like you said. And so this was a completely foreign thing, but anxiety and stress can be very physically, you can feel it. I mean, it's not just mental, it affects your body. And so you got a taste of that. I said, welcome to the club, because I'm very familiar with this.
So I think, I don't want to make this all about COVID, or we don't want to make this all about COVID, but there's a real opportunity for what you do to have an impact in the way that people are dealing with the stress that seems to be manifesting with this disease. So give us some tips, some tricks. What are the things that people can really do, knowing that they can't put themselves in harm's way, but they do have anxiety about this? How do we navigate this? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost a perfect storm. I know that's used quite often, but of creating anxiety disorders. And some of the things, if I can I'll give you the tips in a second, I'll come back to it. But some of the things that we have, and one of the people with generalized anxiety disorder have excessive worry. They just are bouncing from worry to worry to worry. And it's a pretty rare disorder. One of the mechanisms that creates that is this intolerance of uncertainty. And, just a fancy term, just meaning we can't tolerate when we don't know the answer. And so...
Isn't that called life?
Especially right now, it's life right now, because there are so many things. I mean, not just only am I going to get sick and die, am I going to have a job? I mean, you guys are right in the fires. Am I going to have a house? Am I going to be able to, find a place to go if the fires come closer? All of these things are very uncertain right now, and we have to be able to live with that uncertainty. So with all the uncertainty, it creates a lot more worry in general, and it can even create a clinical level of anxiety. The other thing is, for people who are depressed, one of the things that leads to them not being depressed is acting as if you're not depressed. I'm sorry, that's kind of a backward way of saying it, but having, doing things that are important to you, like going out and doing things with friends, going to work, those things get people out of depression. And right now we're kind of having to do the opposite. We're kind of having to quarantine. So this perfect storm of life events are causing us to live in a place where we might create our own clinical problems like depression and worries. So those things are certainly, I think I've been feeling a lot of that stress, and I know how to deal with it. I know how to pay attention to it. And it's just when I was quarantined, it was like, I'm starting to feel these things, and it's like, what's going on? So just creating a structure for oneself is really important. And I think, the structure, even if you're quarantined, having like an exercise routine, having time to talk with friends, if it's by video or however it is, I think creating a routine is probably one of the best pieces of advice I can give. And then being able to live with uncertainty is another piece, is that, we're all dealing with this uncertainty, and that sometimes challenges in life make us stronger. And that, this challenge is probably a good reason for us to get stronger in the long run.
I think that's so fascinating, what you just said. Maybe a way to combat depression is to act as if you're not depressed. So I'm curious about the psychology of that. And is that really creating your own reality, or like a quantum physics kind of, I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising. I mean, I all of this, these treatments that we have, sometimes just acting as if you're not depressed is one of the most important, and the one that I kind of go to. And we talk about, having happiness accidents, and that you'll act as if you're not depressed, and then all of a sudden you'll accidentally become happy. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it, is just the way that there's this phrase, I'll see it when I believe it, or I'll believe it when I see it. I always get it backwards, but it's more now, if I do it, then I'll believe it. And it's that, to me, the behavior comes first, and then the thoughts follow is maybe even a more important way to do it with depression. I've seen a lot of like cognitive therapy where you just try to outthink your depression. And I find just acting as if you're not depressed is even more powerful.
Wow. It's Janna Breslin here. As most of you know, I grew up playing sports which required lots of intensive training. A couple years ago, I switched to CrossFit style workouts, and let's just say my body has taken an absolute beating over the years. I remember waking up after heavy workouts, barely being able to get out of bed. I always added fish oil to my daily regimen for overall wellness and to help combat the post-workout muscle soreness, but my joints and muscles would still be sore for days. I needed something more than just omega-3 fish oil. That's why I take Complete Human PRM Response. This daily super supplement helps my body resolve inflammation quickly so I can live pain-free and keep training. I've been taking it for a while now, and my workouts are better, my recovery is faster, and overall I just feel great. I know we all need a good omega-3 product, and PRM Response is the next generation in omega-3 supplementation with unique pre-resolving mediators that help resolve inflammation quickly so we can get back in the game of life. Head on over to store.completehuman.com to try it 20% off with the code PRM20.
So it's really kind of manifesting your own destiny.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. I think part of it is too, like, I mean, exercise has so many mechanisms, and, you know, it helps our immune system. It helps, you know, there's so many things that we haven't discovered about exercise, but I think that's also helping just the way we handle stress and depression, just helping, I don't know the exact mechanisms, but I think that's a big part of it too. So behaviors can change our physiology as well.
So this kind of ties into my next question about anti-fragility and resilience too. And you wrote a book on anti-fragility, correct?
Yep.
I'd love for you to kind of tie what your findings have been into this time that we're all experiencing.
Yeah, I think you know, again, that sort of, the more I wrote on this, the more I kept finding another mechanism. And, you know, I tried to, you know, test these things on myself, of course, but, you know, exercise was one of the first. And I had a professor once ask, you know, if we look at what happens during exercise, it's creating a stress response in our body. You know, we have a cortisol response, we have all of these things. These are things we usually don't want. Why is exercise good for us then? And that really got me down this path. And, you know, things like fasting. I know it's maybe a trendy diet right now, but I started looking at the literature on that, and, you know, it's just another challenge for me to try. Fasting activates quite a few mechanisms to kill off the poor mitochondria and to create new ones. Cold exposure. I don't know if you guys have tried that much. It's not, I certainly, I certainly don't love it, but go ahead.
We have a hot sauna, so we've been going in there. But no, the last experience I had with cold and extreme cold was at the XPT event in Costa Rica, where we were doing ice baths, and I felt really good about it when I was there. But then after coming back, I'm like, I'd be okay not doing that again. But I think that's where that, you know, that mental resilience comes in, and I should probably exercise that.
It was an element of extremes there too, where you would go in the hot sauna and then go in the ice bath. So it was, you know.
Oh yeah, it was the.
And I remember thinking one time when I was young, I had taken a bowl like out of the microwave and I put it in the sink and I turned the cold water on it and it's, you know, like it's shattered. And I kept thinking while we were in Costa Rica doing that, I'm like, if that happened to the bowl, could that happen to my bones? Like,
probably would be surprised.
That's
yeah,
awesome,
we are certainly familiar with it, and you know, obviously looking at a lot of these extremes, you know, kind of this stress response as a way of building resiliency, and the physical manifestations of that, whether that's, you know, cellular autophagy from fasting or some of these. That's definitely, you know, proven. And I think we've kind of moved into this place where there's a general understanding of what these things can do for us, you know, from the physical standpoint. But again, I would love to talk about the mental thing. And the one thing I keep thinking about was that TV show Fear Factor.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, do we all need do we need a like global case of Fear Factor right now?
I think so, but again, in the right dose at the right amount. So, I mean, to me, I love the work I do with people with anxiety disorders because I get to live vicariously through their success. And, some of the things that, I'll go the fear factor route. People with like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, who are afraid of germs, eventually we'll have them with their hand in the toilet and, playing in the urinal and those type of things. And I don't know how many times I've had my hand in public restroom toilets, and I just don't think I got all this education to do this. But it's if they can do that, then they can handle the daily life. If you can put your hand in a public restroom toilet, you can do anything. But we get there, through graduated steps. I mean, if somebody's ready to jump right in there, that's good. But, we usually do small steps first. And social anxiety is one of my favorite disorders to treat. And, we just have them do funny things like stand in front of the grocery store and just wave to people as they come in, or, hand out coupons, or, ask them questions like, don't I know you? And they don't know the person, but just to have conversations with people where the person might get frustrated with them. And that, that exposure strengthens them, so that if they go to ask somebody on a date, or if they go to do something, that's a piece of cake once you've done these extreme things. We've done many karaoke nights, and those type of things. So it's really neat, to watch people grow, and just to see this process of, it's not a linear process. It's not like they get a little bit stronger for what they've done. It's usually a non-linear, where they have such growth from these little achievements, and that's what's neat about this process.
So this brings up something that I believe I read that you wrote about having someone who was nervous about approaching women or talking to someone, either asking them on a date, and what you had them do was run around the block, drink caffeine, like really challenge them, and then have them go up to somebody, because then that makes the original act of just going up to someone in a normal setting seem easy.
Exactly. Yep. And we've done spraying them with water so they're a little sweaty, or those type of things. Whatever is the biggest fear for the person, and again, it's graduated, but that's what we want to have them feel. And we'll have them. Some people are actually really good at karaoke, but we have them sing songs that they're not good at, or sing badly, or go and be on caffeine so you can't talk to the person. And again, I try to challenge myself with these things. I feel pretty socially anxious, and I think one of the reasons I became a professor was because I just needed that challenge to be in front of people all the time. And I can't preach this without doing things myself. So
right.
Craig, so that brings up a really interesting question, I think, about this time in our cultural evolution, where I want to call it the participation medal time, where everybody's we want to make everybody feel special, and we don't want to exclude everybody. But isn't that kind of the thing that that exclusion, or that ability to rise to the top, the thing that actually generates the growth? And I kind of think about the dating thing. It's like, if everything is so easy with dating apps, where you never really have to face rejection, are we conditioning ourselves to be so socially isolated that without these apps, we're incapable of generating real relationships?
That's an awesome point. I mean, yeah, we do rejection. You have to go do things not to get a number, but to go get rejected. And I think that's important, that you have to feel failure multiple times to not be afraid of it. So I think that makes a lot of sense. That, and also we reinforce the process, not the outcome. That you put yourself in a situation you're scared of. It's not that you were successful in dating, it's you were successful in pushing yourself to do something. So I think those are two important things that you mentioned, just this idea that it's not the outcome that matters, and we want to fail. We want to know that we can survive with failure.
Absolutely. And I think definitely we are all tested with that these days. Throw everything together. It's like embracing the suck and challenging yourself to not be sensitive to those things, because it's inevitable. That will happen throughout our lives regardless, and all the time, correct?
Oh, definitely so. I mean, it does for me.
Yeah,
But,
same.
Yep.
Love it. I wanted to talk about trauma too, and where that is stored in the body. So is that stored in the mind, or is that also stored within the rest of our physical body?
It's funny that you mentioned that. I think The trauma is such a term that means so many different things to different people. So let me first try to define it and what I'm going to discuss. But I think trauma is a pretty traumatic incident. I think people tense up when they're traumatized, and that, it is stored in the body. I know massage therapists who talk about, working on the body and working on a person's trauma that way. So I think it can definitely be in the body. But, what in the brain, we find that there are certain cues that keep reenacting that. And the avoidance of that feeling is sometimes what keeps that trauma going. And the safety behaviors is what keeps any anxiety really going. Is the maintaining factor, is that you don't fully embrace thinking about it on a deep level where you can process it and move on with it. And so I went into the mind part of it, but this idea, so if I'm, let's say, let me simplify it to social anxiety. If I'm going to push myself to go into a situation that I'm scared of, but at the same time, I'm going to avert my gaze and not look at the person and, just do it. These safety behaviors just made me not get the full exposure of it. And this processing of trauma is that same sort of thing. You have to really feel it for your body. You feel it in your whole body. And trauma therapists will actually have the person, go into a full panic attack or whatever it is, feel it. And then they can reprocess it and kind of, put it to the side. That, the avoidance of it makes it a bigger deal, I think. And I don't know if I made any sense with that.
And I've almost heard of recreating the trauma in a sense, and then reprogramming that part of the brain to heal from that. And this year, I did therapy for the first time this year, and we were talking about that, is how trauma is stored in the lower part of the brain. And there are certain ways to reprogram it to not be as, effective negatively on ourselves. So very interesting topic. I love the science stuff.
Some of the things, Joseph Ledoux did a lot with the amygdala in the brain, that lower processing that's thought to be our fear. And Elizabeth Phelps, one of his students, is really doing some neat things with it. And they've tried things with drugs, and it's hard to get drugs into there. But it just sort of severs the connection. And she's doing some computer lab things where they have them reimagine it, and then just by the way they're showing slides and images, it causes a reprocessing of it. So it is really fascinating that that reprogramming of it. If you just sever connection, and the way that it's brought back up, it can change things.
Craig, so that brings up an interesting question. Is the pharmaceutical interventions that we see, whether that's, Zoloft or any of these, are those really having any long-term positive impact, or are we just putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg?
That's a great question.
I'm not a pharmacist, and I don't want to bash the pharmaceutical industry, but I think it's...
That's okay, we'll do that. We do that very well.
Excellent. I mean, my experience with anxiety disorders, they have to face it, and that's how they really get over it. If you're taking, benzodiazepine or something that calms the anxiety, it's just kind of calming it temporarily, and it's another safety behavior in my mind, that you're not actually feeling it, you're not actually processing it. You've just told your body, hey, this is something really bad, I need to get rid of it, and you've just kind of perpetuated that cycle.
I'm not saying actually becoming resilient and stronger, or is it numbing it out? Right.
Exactly. Yep. And I don't want to say... I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, people do benefit from it, so I don't want to take that away. Whatever, is helping. If people are paralyzed from this and it helps them, I don't want to take that away from them. But in my recommendations and what I do, I try not to recommend that.
Well, and I was thinking right after my divorce, I had a short stint on antidepressants, and it was about a week, and I'm like, I can't do this. It just, that feeling of numbness, I felt like a caged animal. I'm like I wanted to get out, but I couldn't. And I remember I went to my psychiatrist. I'm like, nah, I'm done with this. He's like, why don't you give it another week? I'm like, nope. And within 48 hours after going off of it, I'm like, okay, this is what I should be feeling.
Yeah, and I think it's so important I'm not against pharmaceuticals or medications like that, but it's like you also want to give yourself a fighting chance too with proper diet, with exercise, with reading, with focusing on good things and surrounding yourself with good people. It's like there are other things that I think are also very, very important to start off with too. And if you need that extra help, you know, I believe that's how it should be done. Start with the basics, start with making your core things strong, and then add in additional things if you need. But not that I know what I'm talking about, but it sounds all right.
You know, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, is we've made things way too complicated.
Yeah, or yeah, I mean, and with pharmaceuticals, maybe not even complicated enough. Like it's just hard to, you know, you're taking something, ingesting it, and you're trying to get it to a particular area of the brain. And like serotonin reuptake inhibitors, you know, it affects multiple parts, but we only want, you know, like in an animal study, we might inject it in the part we want, and maybe it works fine. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying, but you know, in some ways we're overcomplicating, and maybe pharmaceuticals are just too blunt of a measure. It's just affecting too many things.
Don't use cannon to kill a mosquito.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. It's one of my favorite ones. I'd love for you to touch on the relationship between the thinking brain and the feeling brain, because I think that's a very interesting thing there. I'd love for you to touch on that.
Yeah. No. This is one of my favorite topics, and I've kind of gone to an extreme on this. And you know, I think, you know, as an intellectual, I was always taught to, you know, use the thinking brain, and your rational sense will take over. But our body works quite well by itself, and our reptilian brain, you know, our lower part of our brain does a lot of things on autopilot. And you know, you know, of course, our physiological mechanisms of breathing and all that is there. But a lot of the things, just like when we're hungry, when we're cued, you know, people trying to diet think that you have to use willpower, but it's, you know, a lot of the research has shown it's a lot of simple cues. And just, you know, if you put a candy bowl next to you versus across the room, you know, it's not willpower, it's just a habit, you're getting to it. So I think there's a lot of lower level mechanisms that we have to work on first, that our thinking brain is sort of a beta unit, evolutionarily, that's on a beta unit. Our animal brain has been through multiple revisions, and it's something that, you know, is much better built. You know, for something like anxiety disorders, we're not going to overthink it. The thinking comes afterwards. Our initial reaction to a curved object on the ground is to jump up and you know, without even realizing it's a snake or it's a curved stick. So our emotional or animal brain jumps in much quicker than our thinking brain, and we can't, you know, outthink, you know, that reaction.
See,
now,
and
is
it's
that
that reason. Remember the fly the other night? See, there's
So,
an anthropological reason.
I have to share this story because it's just hilarious. So I walk into this room, and all of a sudden Evan just flew across the room, and I had no idea what was going on. And apparently he was trying to kill a fly that came out of a closet or something, but he has a crazy fear of spiders, and I think he thought it was a spider.
I thought it was a spider. I opened this closet door, and this thing came at me, and it was a rather large fly. I thought it was a spider, so I had a evolutionary response, which now we're finding out was perfectly normal.
And somehow you just sprouted wings and flew across. I've never seen you jump that
Look,
crazy.
This is sympathetic, parasympathetic response. It's fight or flight. You know, if it was a dragon, I would have fought it. A spider, I'm going to flee.
Right.
I'm going to run out of the room.
Exactly. So this is the fight or flight
Exactly.
situation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yep. And I'm going to go back to Joseph Ledoux. I mentioned his name earlier. What he found is, so we have two pathways in the brain. And I'm sorry, this may be silly, but so when we see something like that object that you saw, the fly or spider, you didn't know what it was, you know, it goes through our eyes, it goes to our thalamus, and then it goes back to the occipital lobe, and we process it. And, you know, it's got texture, this, that, and then comes back up the parietal lobe, and we name it a fly or spider. That takes a long time compared to the quick route that goes right to our amygdala that says emergency, get the hell out of there. And that's what you did. And so the quick pathway, we react much faster than that slow thinking process pathway.
See?
Love it. see what?
I don't know. I feel validated. I feel validated now that I flew across the room in you know, abject horror of a fly.
You did great.
So, you know, obviously a lot of this stuff, on paper and even academically makes a lot of sense. But as we really start to kind of figure out how do we reemerge from the trauma, this global trauma of COVID, even some of the trauma surrounding like George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, there's been a lot of, let's just say it, 2020 has been an interesting year so far. So, as we really start to reemerge and try to rebuild lives, our lives kind of come back to some semblance of normalcy. How do we do that in real practical terms?
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that part of the way that I look at it, I mean, it can become very discouraging. And, I have, just in talking to a lot of people, I don't want to just be positive for the sake of positiveness, but anytime we have these stressors, the George Floyd incident, was a terrible thing, and we've had a lot of protests, and I think there'll be some positive change from that. At least I hope there's some positive change from that. And that's where the stressors on the system, we may not like them, and it's a terribly unfortunate thing, but we just have to hope that it stresses our system enough to change things. The coronavirus response, again, it's another terrible thing. And I hope it prepares us for the next one. I mean, there's going to be another one, at some point in time, just looking back in history. I mean, there's always been something, maybe we can prepare so well that it doesn't get to this level. Let's hope that happens. But I think that's a big part of it, is that we have to better prepare for it. As individuals, I think that way, I try to keep this sort of idea that it's going to make me stronger in the long run. People are losing their jobs, their careers, families over this, family members. It's going to be hard to see that, potential for growth out of this. I don't necessarily have the greatest answer in the world for that, because all of these things are very difficult right now.
Absolutely. And this kind of makes me think about something I just read on social media, so it must be true, right? But talking about positivity and then toxic positivity, where there's this positivity where you're like, okay, this is hard. And of course you want to be optimistic and stuff, but if we're always like, oh, this will make you stronger, this will make you better, and it's like, it's also important to recognize that things suck sometimes and things are hard, and to not always have to put this positive spin on things. So it kind of just reminds me of that, like this conversation. I mean, yeah, this has been very challenging. I think it's good to recognize that for the most part, I hope that we will all come out stronger and more resilient and less fragile after this, right? Yeah, this.
You said it much better than I did. Thank you.
I sometimes don't. But.
I think it makes sense. We've all been conditioned with this thing that, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So we've kind of got this innate idea that things are always going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe sometimes they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Or this might be a multi-generational, recovery from this. I mean, let's look at the, the economy. That's not going to fix itself by 2021. So, this is a multi-generational or a multi-year response to this thing. So I think part of it is we have to understand what we can control and how do we make that an element of our mental fortitude, and what we can't control, and recognize that, okay, things might just really suck for a while.
Mm-hmm. I also do think this has been a huge motivation for people to focus on their health, right? Not just their mental health, and they've been pushed to focus on that, but also physically. They're like, wow, if I get this, and if I want to survive it and be healthy afterwards, I need to make sure that I am physically healthy as well. So I think it has been a catalyst for people to live healthier lives.
Well, and I mean, they talk about the COVID-19 and not the disease, but the weight gain.
Right.
And that's an interesting thing, right? Is, now we're sheltered in place. People who used to go to gyms aren't going to gyms anymore. Stress response can often manifest in the form of eating. So we're seeing a lot of people just, binge, Indian food.
It's really good.
It really is good. As we look at that, what are some other things that you would recommend to our listeners as we try to really stress our physical bodies in a way that makes us resilient to some of, to this virus, to some of the other things? And I think about it in the context of, I flew 160 times last year. I think my immune system was it was like Arnold. It was just jacked. Now we don't go outside, and I go to the grocery store and I freaking out that I got a germ. So how do we physically really make ourselves resilient, while mentally doing the same thing?
Like I also kind of feel that same way. Like I've know all these principles, but yeah, I got into a corner where I'm afraid to, and I don't want people to go and expose themselves to all kinds of potential viruses. But I think we have to eventually start living normally and realize when we're having that fear response. I and my patients always say this, if it feels bad, do it. And maybe that's not the best advice right now, but you kind of know when that fear response is coming on, and this is kind of probably a little irrational. So I have to push myself towards it rather than away from it. The other thing though, I think I need to say is I'm talking very aspirational and, this looking on the bright side. And I know going into quarantine, I looked at, Isaac Newton created the calculus when he went into the quarantine for the plague. And, like I'm going to work on, so many big projects. It didn't happen. And we have to give ourselves forgiveness. People want to do this great exercise program at home and, do these great things. You have to give yourself forgiveness for not living up to your expectations during these stressful times. That sometimes we're not going to come out the best we wanted to, and I think forgiveness is also an important component of what we're going through right now.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, right? Because I think when this first started, there was a bunch of memes floating around on Instagram and Facebook, and it's like, if you don't come out of this with a hobby or a book or a better body, then you failed. I'm like, why don't we set the bar of, if you don't just come out of it, just come out of it alive.
Yeah.
Like why is it's kind of the everyday above ground philosophy, but I get so sick of social propagating this concept that like you have to do something. It's like we have to go into our cave and redo Beethoven's Fifth. It's like, no, let's just survive. And I think our motto around here is live, grow stronger, and fight another day. And as we kind of do that on a daily basis, it sets us that, okay, our successes are great successes and our failures are just, those are all okay too, but let's get through this.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And something else you said earlier that you said about the pursuit of happiness, and the Dalai Lama, I try to quote him, but I know it's never right, but he said something like that the excessive pursuit of happiness or the excessive avoidance of suffering is what leads us to mental disorder or mental issues. And I think that, that same thing, we're meant to suffer at times. We're meant to have unhappiness, and that avoidance of it sometimes can lead us to just as many difficulties as the excessive pursuit of happiness.
Is that a cultural thing? And I think of a lot of our historical civilizations, the Romans, the Greeks, there seems to be like this rise in ascendance where things become so, dare I say, gluttonous, right? I mean, I remember like the vomitoriums from the Roman, the Roman Empire, where they would eat so much and that they would have to go vomit so they could eat some more. And it was a status symbol that you could afford to eat like that. There's this gluttony that came out of this. Have we gone that way where we have to just constantly one up our happiness level? We're not, people think it's like, oh, well, I need Instagram engagement. I need Facebook likes. I need to just live a life where I'm avoiding suffering. I mean, Buddha said it's kind of the middle way, but have we kind of culturally gotten to a point where we're not willing to suffer at all?
I think that's a good assessment. We look at other cultures. I think, Russian culture, and sometimes it looks like they're just brooding and never happy, but, they're kind of, this expectation, I will be unhappy at times, and there's no need for me to always try to be happy. And, some Eastern European cultures are just, and, the concept of depression is, almost, it's unthinkable for some certain cultures. And, we talked about pharmaceuticals, and I probably should stay off the pharmaceutical topic, but, and I forgot what book this was in, but it was just talking about how there was basically no incident of depression in this country. And when pharmaceutical industries just started talking about it and started selling SSRIs, that all of a sudden depression skyrocketed. And, this idea that, unhappiness is something we need to avoid just can sometimes lead to, depression and other problems.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I was thinking, as you were saying that, Craig, I was thinking about like the restless leg syndrome pharmaceutical product. I'm like, is that really a thing? It's not a disease. Like restless leg syndrome? Come on. Like, don't drink coffee after 5 p.m. Like, that's your solution, not a pharmaceutical product.
Actually, I had an interesting question about fasting, because you said that's something that you practice, and we are also big fans of fasting.
No. Hold on. We are not big fans of fasting. We like the result of fasting. We hate fasting.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm a big fan of eating.
Right. No, that's a great point. So we try and do like intermittent fasting in the morning and stuff, and I think my brain is clear when I don't just binge in the morning or whatever, have a bunch of food. So I prefer that. But we have also been doing like sometimes 2-day fasts. But I was curious what you do.
I try to do 16 to 18 hours a day for sure. So I stop eating 3 or 4 p.m. and then don't eat until 11, 12 in the morning. And then I'll try to do a big one. And it used to be when I traveled. I think traveling is the best for fast because you don't have the cues, you don't have the normal, and it's easy not to eat airline food and those type of things. But I would try to do a 2 or 3 day. I'm trying to gear up for a 3-day. I read a study about a 58-hour fast. And so I was trying to do a longer, like a 60 or 72-hour fast coming up. But yeah, usually it's just daily trying to go 16, 18 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of those things that I want to talk about as well. And as we talk about resiliency, we have this tendency, I think, to kind of push things to excess, right? So we know that cellular autophagy can begin with
like more is better.
Yeah, the daily intermittent fasting, so 16 to 18 hours. That leads to autophagy. Then you start, and it's funny. Like I look at David Sinclair in his book, and he talks a lot about this. But we kind of go overboard sometimes. So then it's like, what is it? Is it a 3-day fast? Is it a 5-day fast? I know people are like, I do a 10-day water fast every 3 months. I'm like, why? Like, what are you getting out of that? So, from a resilience standpoint, how do we balance this need for kind of stressing our body to get the achieved physiological response without going too far and making, creating kind of these neurotic behaviors that seem to permeate our culture so much?
Yeah, no, and I've struggled with this question too, because I mean, one of the benefits of fasting is like this AMPK production, that AMPK, and then that leads to more mitochondria and fission and fusion, or fission of mitochondria. And then we have this opposite response. And if we have AMPK, it shuts off the IGF response. So as we age, we're supposed to have more muscle. So we want IGF, right? But then we're also supposed to have more mitochondria and that AMPK response. And these two things are in opposition to each other. So I try to cycle them as much as possible. And I think going to an extreme for a little bit and then going to the opposite extreme. But yeah, I don't think a 10-day fast is all that, for me at least, is all that useful. Maybe it'll be a good challenge once, and someday it will be a nice challenge, but and I like to do things that challenge me, but I think we need to kind of swing the pendulum, but we don't have to swing the pendulum off the rope completely. So, we just go to a little extreme, push that a little bit, and then go to the opposite extreme and push that a little bit. So.
Yeah, so this brings up, with stress and the good amount of stress and finding that balance, how does one find that healthy balance between stressing just the right amount? I feel like that's something I kind of struggle with, like, if pushing it in the gym is really good and I know how to push, how far is too far? And if, too much of a good thing, it's like, how does one find that balance between them?
Yeah, and exercises kind of was like a big component for me of trying to figure that piece out. And I think there's so many individual differences and factors involved with that age is probably one of the biggest. Is that what can you handle at this time? I can push myself and do. I was reading Jason Stratham workout, and I don't think it's actually something he does all the time, or if he does, he's superhuman. But I could do that for a couple days, but then I'm going to need a week to recover. That's probably not the best thing for me to do. But I can, I know to push myself enough. And I think, what's worked for me over the years to stay healthy is sort of this military idea of, always be ready to go, and, never leave a little bit in the tank, so that if you had to go on a mission the next day, you'd be ready to go. And that seems to be just enough stress for me. So I'm not answering your question at all, but I think it probably depends quite a bit on you figuring out what's right for you as an individual.
Yeah.
You can't do what somebody else does, and just because you want to be like them. I think it's finding your own limits, pushing a little bit towards that limit, and then backing off. And I think the sink analogy works well. You're basically trying to flood the sink to the top right before it overflows, and then let it drain down again, fill it up again, and let it drain down again. And that comes from Verkhoshansky. But this idea, we're not going to try to overflow the sink every time we train or every time we fast, or anything like that. We're just trying to get it close.
So in that respect, does something like CrossFit, a group workout, and obviously we just interviewed the interim CEO of CrossFit. You're a big CrossFitter, but does that in a lot of ways have the potential to backfire when we're in these group settings and we're sitting next to someone who's, well, I'm doing this weight or I'm doing this many reps, and then I'm like, I shouldn't be doing it, but my ego is going to show up.
That's a little healthy competition.
and I'm wondering, when does healthy competition push into the realm of too far, where we're trying to keep up with someone and ultimately overfill the sink?
I kind of want to interrupt and just say, I think physically that's easier to pick up on. I think because you feel it, you're like, okay, my body, I'm not supposed to move this way. My shoulder isn't supposed to move that way. You just hurt your shoulder and for something you weren't prepared to do, pretty much. But also I think mentally and emotionally, I think that's where there's more gray area almost, right? I mean, speaking just from personal experience, this year has been challenging for me for a few reasons, and I found myself saying, this is too much stress. This is like I'm at the limit. This is too much stress. And so is that still a good thing once you kind of reach that limit, and then once you recognize, kind of bring it back and do what you can to I'm kind of all over the place right now too. I don't know if that makes sense, but
I was just asking a question about CrossFit.
And then I jump in and go,
like, wow, that was a train wreck.
If I can try, like CrossFit is kind of like life. I mean, in a way, it's, and I think it's dependent on CrossFit's such an amalgamous term. You've got I don't know if they still do workout of the day on the main CrossFit page, but you've got that, but then you've got every other gym creating their own program and competition type programs. And it varies greatly. But I think the idea of competition, like you said, is useful, but I think sometimes the reinforcer is to lift more weights or to do it quicker, and maybe the reinforcer should be how good your form is. And I loved doing CrossFit and really enjoyed that, but when I would push so much for a certain goal of weights or time, that's when I would get injured as well. And so I think it's finding your limits of good form. And maybe, like I always thought, they should have a workout where they have like gymnastic judges judge how well you do movements. And, that could be your score of it. And that would be kind of a good reinforcer for CrossFit movements. And, so doing things like
weight, it's form.
Yeah.
How good do you look?
Well, and instead of, and also time, right? Because when you're doing complex movements for time, what's the inevitable thing that's going to get lost? And that's your form.
Oh yeah. I know that.
like when you start throwing weight over your head and you're trying to get so many reps in a certain amount of time, you're naturally going to lose that form.
Oh yeah, you're focused on just getting as much as you can in, not on how you're doing it.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to bring something else back that we talked about prior to the interview, was choice in relation to happiness, and how maybe too much choice leads to less happiness. And I'd love for you to touch on that.
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast about divorce and just, this idea of, finding the right mate in life. And one of the things that I talk about in my research design classes, these research articles on choice. And what choice researchers have found is that the more choice we have, the more paralyzed we are, and the more we go to regret our choice later. So, one of the early studies was on retirement plans. If a company let you choose between, 5 retirement plans people would choose, if they let you choose between 50, people wouldn't even choose it and they would just not choose anything and lose their company match because there's just too many choices. We become paralyzed not making a choice. And then when we have that many choices, we tend not to be happy with our choice. And the example that I've heard before is, this is way before your times, but jeans used to only come in, a few different types, and you just would have to buy, Wrangler 501 jeans, and they wouldn't fit very well, and that was your choice, and you weren't responsible for that. But now we have so many choices that, we're now responsible, and we're unhappy if we make the wrong choice. So I was thinking about that was way long-winded, but just this idea of with relationships, that we're now so connected. We're not in a small place where we know everybody there, and this is our pool of potential mates is much bigger. And when we have this many choices, we tend to make ourselves less happy and maybe can't even choose. And then, so I always bring up this question, maybe arranged marriages was a better option. And I do it to get class talking about things, but arranged marriages, there's less divorce. They don't have any choice involved, and they end up making themselves happier in the long run. I know that probably didn't make a whole lot of sense, but
No, it did.
It's funny, and I was going to bring up arranged marriages, and we've discussed this on my other podcast, Single Parents Daily, is the arranged marriage divorce rate is a lot less. And, is that a function of religious involvement usually in arranged marriages, or is that just because you don't have a choice and you're like, we're going to make this work? And to that extent, you brought up something interesting, is that with all of the choices, it's the regret, right? Like, oh, well, I went with this person, and then people inevitably start to feel like they've settled. Like, oh, I could have had this with Bob or Jim or, Tim or whatever. So how do we, in a relationship world where we're striving for connection, how do we eliminate that so that we can focus on being content or joyful in one relationship without constantly looking over our shoulder thinking, well, the grass is greener over there? And we all know the grass is greener where you water it, but we've forgotten how to do that.
I'm not the relationship expert on this.
We're throwing a lot at you, man.
No. I mean, I think what you said, you're kind of getting at some of those things, that we have to kind of eliminate choice. And I think the more permanent we make our relationship, the more we'll water the grass where it's at. And, that there's no other option. I can't get out unless, there's a threat to life or, threat to something. And when you set that, maybe then, you'll water the grass, using your analogy, where you're at. I think the other things that are important is that the type of relationship. I know there are, exchange, people talk about exchange relationships versus sort of communal relationships, and exchanges, I do something for you, you do something for me. And then there's a lot of resentment when there's not something done. I think a communal, you're just doing something for the sake of doing it. You just want your partner to be better, even if your partner doesn't even know you've done that for them. And that, I think, is probably, now I'm going all over the place with this, but that's probably something else that can improve relationships, is this idea of just doing things for the other person without them even knowing.
We talk a lot about that in M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled, is, true love is nurturing someone else's spiritual and emotional growth. And I think we've certainly forgotten how to do that, because there's this kind of like, well, I took out the trash, what are you going to do for me? It's a scorecard. And I don't think that any relationship, whether that's intimate, friendship, business, can survive in a scorecard world. It has to be, I want to nurture the relationship, not get something out of it. But is from a clinical perspective, I've read that there's a really high degree of narcissism bordering on, almost sociopathic behavior that seems to emerge in the digital world. Is that true? And if so, how do we kind of take a step back from that precipice?
Yeah, I don't know if it's true or not. I can imagine what you're saying. It sounds like a feasible idea. This idea that we're presenting our idealized selves, and we want to have a partner that fits that idealized self, and it's hard to live up to that, and a partner to live up to that. I think, gosh, I'm forgetting the person. I'm sorry, but forgot the name. But he talks about his partner just, always remembers that idealized self, and that's how they built a good relationship together. Is that he just, thinks of me at that. He forgets that I don't wash the dishes. He, forgets that I, pick my nose, and sort of just sees my idealized self. You know, I think sort of thinking of what can I do to make my partner better is probably a really important piece of advice that I might give with that. You know, I don't know if I'm answering your question, because I think you answered it kind of within that, you know, if we can reduce our own narcissism, maybe that's the key to building a better relationship, and to think of others, to sort of have a pro-social, altruistic, I'm not going to try to get anything else out of this relationship. I'm just going to do for the other person.